Hi, I'm Diana Payton with Technical Writing Uncensored, and I'm here with Robert Delwood, API Technical Writer. Hey, how you doing?
Hey, pretty well. Thanks for inviting me on the on your show.
My pleasure. So, how did you get into technical writing?
That's what question I get a lot in a very roundabout way. I went the journalism route, so I'm a journalist by education. I've got a journalism degree, but I'm a programmer by vocation. I'm self-taught in programming, and more specifically, my specialty in journalism was photography. So out of school, I got a job in photography. I got really lucky, and I ended up at NASA.
Oh,
And
cool.
I know, and everyone thinks that it's a little more mundane than it sounds. And come to find out, I didn't like it at all. It wasn't anything. So I switched. I'm sorry, I switched over to programming. I fell back
Mhm.
on my programming aspect after 2 or 3 years. Much happier, much richer too. They get paid more than photographers do. And then a buddy of mine called me. He had just moved up to Seattle and Microsoft, and he calls me up one day and says they're looking for people who know programming and writing. I never heard of this before. And after I looked into it, literally within 3 months of that phone call, I had moved up to Microsoft, and I never really looked back. I don't want to sound corny in this, but I have to say this was really what I was meant to do. I really enjoyed writing about APIs and talking to devs and being a programmer writer.
Yeah, I think that there really is a technical writer type. We seem to. It's not quite a calling, but we're definitely happy being in the that kind of in between technical and creative niche.
Right, right. And you just never know what's out there. I
Yeah.
encourage everyone when they first start a job, do everything. Do
Hmm.
everything you can, from release notes to bundling. In the old days, we actually published our own books by some binding machines. Do everything because you don't know what's out there. You don't know
Yeah.
what's gonna strike your interest.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you only write API docs. I've always kind of written everything. How do you only write API docs?
I heard that comment first from you. I don't know how I got into only APIs. It is a specialty. And I guess once I got in, I never really had a reason, and my bosses never had a reason to pull me off of APIs and into more conventional writing. So I guess I've been lucky in that regard. I'll be honest, I can't recall the last time I wrote release notes or stuff like that. Now, I have written technical articles, and in a pinch, I do write admin and conventional tech articles, but only because they segue into each other. I
Hmm.
can't write about procedures about that add a user without it being just easier on me to write the admin guide about
Hmm.
how the steps to write a user. It really is a specialty that I wish more people would recognize. For instance, one of the things that always catches my attention in job descriptions, they do exactly what you say. You'll write release notes and how-to articles and admin guides, and they'll always mention APIs almost as the last thing. And you can't really mix the two. The two are such different writing areas that if you
Yeah.
compromise, you're not going to get good results with either one.
In your view, how do the two types of writing differ? API documentation and really everything else documentation.
Worlds, they are world apart, but there's a couple things working against this. One, no one really knows, or at least until recently, no one really knew what API writers did. Too often, oh God, too often I would hear people say, as long as you can speak English, you can write. And I'm sure you've heard that too, or it's just tech writing to devs. And that so understates all what we do. I mean, if you look at there's medical writers
Hmm.
that are almost never associated with tech writing. They are tech writers, but they're so specialized.
Yeah.
They don't go to our conferences. They don't really apply for our jobs. It's just a different, same thing with API work. But there's a couple key differences. Yes, I don't consider API writing, when it comes down to it, I don't consider API writing to be tech writing. One, there is such a dependence on code and coding.
Hmm.
So keep in mind, you're writing to developers about development. So it stands to reason that you've entered their world. You have to talk to them in their jargon. You have to know the concepts they do. You have to use the right terms. So you're entering a programmer's world, which is different than conventional tech writing because of the specialty. If we can, I want to talk about that point later. You don't
Absolutely.
have to be a programmer to start. I want to make that clear. Another difference is I call the work infinitely deep, in that you can always add more details to your stuff. I don't want to be criticized for picking a ridiculously simple example, but for instance, when you look at a login page and there's two boxes and a button, there's really only so much you can write about it, and you can look at it and say, well, that will take me 45 minutes. So this topic will take. You have a good feeling that you can exhaust the topic in that time. That makes scheduling very easy. You don't get that in API writing. First of all, like I said, you can always add more to it. You can always be more clear. And you cannot write too much about it. Two, you don't know what you're going to bump into until you actually start documenting. You don't know you can look at the call's name, but until you actually look at it and run it, you don't know what complications are hidden there. And believe me, there can be a lot of complications, from just being a bad function to unclear results to unclear parameters. You don't have the convenience of being able to set a definite time period. And I say that because I've met a lot of managers who aren't comfortable with that. My question when it comes to schedule is, or my answer typically is, I can get 50% covered in 3 months. Mm-hmm. And they don't understand why I'm saying 50%. You can usually, tech writers can usually, like I said, exhaust it in a fairly predictable manner. Three, another big difference, I said you're in the developer's world, so there's a dependence on code. Mm-hmm. And my standards is every field, every function, every overview has code associated with it. You have to find out what the code should be, write it, test it, and all these things take a little bit of more time. So you have like 5 factors, each adding a little bit of time. Mm-hmm. And it starts adding up.
Yeah.
Yes, there are differences in between this and tech writing. So I've always said, if you treat APIs like tech writing, you're going to get tech writing results, which are not going to be good for anyone. And it's going to be underdocumented. It's going to be rushed. It's not going to be as clear as it needs to be to everyone.
Do you have any advice for someone who wants to get into API writing?
First of all, I encourage it. I will do anything I can to encourage. It is a huge market. It's an up and coming market. People are finally seeing the value of documentation and good documentation. And in terms of tech writing world, it's probably as secure of a base as you can get in this crazy market now. Getting into it is a little bit tough, I'll admit. There are no programs in schools. You can't go to a university and get an API degree. There are a lot of private classes. I can probably list 5 or 6 academies and courses out there. There are some great online. It's hard to mention APIs without mentioning Tom Johnson.
Oh, yeah.
Tom Johnson's I'd Rather Be Writing site. He's a technician and he has very detailed tutorials, but it's still not clear taking those if this would be right for you. So in getting started, the best way I would recommend is look around, find an API. There are some simple ones. On my site, I use a NASA-related site that's as simple as it gets. Mm-hmm. And you look at it, and I wrote an article on my website that sort of walks someone who doesn't know what this is all about in 4 or 5 steps about what this is all about. If it feels right for you, pursue it. If not, you have a good idea of what it is. And you can to make that decision in moving on. And then it's just a matter of writing APIs. Take one call. It could be very easy. Something like get a list of active users. And you start writing about it. This gets a list of users. You're going to find one sentence eventually is not going to be enough for that. And you do that several times and you go back in a week or 3 weeks, and you try and replicate what you did literally with what you wrote.
Mhm.
And if you can't do it, fix it. And it's just iterative about that. And you get a feeling on about what this is all about, the kind of details that you need. Developers, I will admit, developers turned writers have an advantage here because they've already used APIs and they know what they like and know what they don't like. You're starting from scratch. Many are starting from scratch and have never used an API reference guide before. And there's no way around it. You have to learn what an API reference guide does and what information is in there. And really the only way of doing that is sitting down and working with explain the calls. It's not a one-time effort. In my standard practice is when I document API guides, it's an iterative process that I do in passes. So my first pass might be add all the fields and a sentence for each one. When I'm done with that, now I have a better idea of what the APIs are, what the calls do, what the workflow might be. Then I go back and I do a second pass and I add more details. And you go through all the calls, adding another sentence or adding an example. And you do that a third time. So it's just a series of passes, which is consistent with what I said a minute ago, I believe, that it's infinitely deep. You can always go back and add more, but you don't write it right the first time.
You mentioned you have a website. Can you tell me about that, please?
I actually have two. The problem is I'm not a graphic artist, so my website looks pretty bad. I'll include those in the list later. But I also have a repository on medium.com. If you search for Medium Delwood, you'll find it. And the good thing about that is I don't have to deal with graphics. It's pretty much writing. It's free-formed. It's whatever I'm interested or feel like could be helpful at the moment. And occasionally I'll just prove to myself that I can still write non-technical articles. I think I've lost the ability to use all the cool verbs. And there's a couple unrelated. I have one article there. I just want to see if I could still do it. I did original research into Mozart's death. And I'll hint, it's not what everyone thinks. It's a great movie.
Interesting.
But it's not, in my opinion, as a non-doctor, it's not right. But it was fun to research, and it was a different kind of writing.
Yeah, so if you start posting articles written in API spec, should we stage an intervention?
Yes, please. Years ago, when I was at Microsoft, you are right to assume that I was pretty arrogant. Young guy, Microsoft. And I was writing for our local paper. I wrote an article, and my editor came back and said, it's a great article, but it's dry. And I didn't believe that. So I got the article, and I read it, and my goodness, it was dry. So hubris has its place in this industry.
For someone getting into API writing, besides using the APIs, any skills or tools they should focus on?
So one of the things about moving into a developer's world is you now have developer tools. You move away from the familiarity of maybe Word or...
bite your tongue, sir. I haven't used Word for documentation in years.
Okay, Flare.
Visual Studio Code is where I go to, basically.
Okay, good. But yes, and you touch on exactly. You move into a more Docs code world.
So it might be harder for someone like more into data or used to using a CMS, maybe?
Correct, because you're using a new tool set that by definition really has to be consistent with what the devs use. Add into the fact that the gold standard in API is the open API format, which is plain text. You can use any text editor, including Word, but it's not Ditto. So you have to add your formatting. There's all-in-one tools, README and Spotlight and Mintify, that assist with that. But still, it's still a new set of tools. So there's a new way of thinking. You have to visualize the information a little bit differently. I personally like Redocly. It's probably the best rendering engine out there. It's simple, it's clean. So there's a different set of tools. Now, as you go from pure text, a minute ago, I said you have to sit down and make the calls. So you'll be using tools like Postman, which is one of the best tools out there. It's an API development tool. But in terms of what tech writers do, API documentation writer, it lets you make the calls. So you can add the endpoint, you can add the variables, you can save calls for later use. It's easy to change variables. but it's absolutely required. This is not in groups that I'm a manager or lead of. This is not optional. The writers have to make every call in Postman because unless you make the call, you're guessing.
Why can't I just do it in curl or like using a Python or JavaScript code block to make my API call?
Okay, good question. Curl, in my opinion, is a anathema on the, am I pronouncing that right? On
Anathema, I think.
anathema in the API writing world. I see all these applications like README that put curl right in the top right, but it's not how developers use API documents. They're not going to be making curl calls in their application. So why are you even using it or displaying it? Now, that's an aside to your questions. Yes, curl is designed in part to handle REST calls, but it's very awkward to use. If you have no variables, it's just a straight get call that returns. Yeah, maybe you can get away with it. If it has one or two variables, user ID or a type, you want to return a type of returns. Yes, that's one. But when you start getting into the real world, you're going to have 8, 10, even 20 variables. They may be even time. If you're doing a delivery service, you may have to have the current time set, the time set to current because call's only good for 5 minutes. And at that point, curl just becomes completely unusable. It's very hard. It's one line of code and you have to backspace and change stuff. Postman, you can, like I said, list all the variables in its own matrix. You go directly to it. You can change it. You can save calls and all the parameters. So you can find what you need, save it, come back a week later or so. It is just so much more convenient. You have export options. You can import calls. You can export calls to Postman or to another. You can convert it into other languages. It can convert to Python or curl if you want. There's very little it can't do. So my advice is just learn Postman up front and you'll be so far ahead of this game. But making the call is an absolute necessity because until you do it, you don't know what it does. You don't know what it returns. You have to see the actual return value and compare it to your documentation. You have to be able to make errors. We should also be de facto testers. Put an integer where a character is expected intentionally. See what it does. So there's a lot of reasons just to use Postman. I mean, a lot of people like getting fancy with their tool. No. Just keep it nice and simple. Moving away from docs with code, like I said, you have your all-in-one tools. These are full-fledged applications. They will present a user interface, and it does make writing APIs a little simpler. I personally don't advocate those. Just learn Open API at the very start. Even applications like Mintlify and README, they have Open API somewhere in its recesses. So if you understand what Open API can do, then now understanding what Mintify does is just a shorthand to getting to what you need. But it is a different set of tools, and you're going to have to learn these tools and learn how they all interact with each other. It's not a problem. You do things one step at a time, and you'll get there.
So how would you suggest a new or aspiring writer get some samples or develop a portfolio piece to demonstrate that they can write API documentation?
So examples are not hard to find. SmartBear owns Swagger. The iconic sample in our industry is Swagger's Pet Store example.
Oh, yeah.
Google Pet Store. It comes in both Swagger format and Open API format, and it's good and it's well written. I forget the word I'm looking for. Conforming. It's conforming, and you get that and you load it into your editor and you start modifying it. You start adding descriptions. You start adding examples. Open API was just not a random set of tags that someone put together. It is designed to fully describe a full functioning API call. So in fact, you can use Open API to generate your API calls. It's called API first. So it very clearly defines 8 or 15, depending on what you want, characteristics that each call has to have. Has to have a data type, has to have a description, has to have a an endpoint, and there can be 15 or so of these. I forget your question.
It was, you actually kind of answered it. It was, how would you recommend someone who wants to get into
Oh,
API writing develop a sample for their portfolio to demonstrate that they can do this? And so find the pet
yes.
store example and then add armadillos and other things to it and extend on it. And I think that that's really cool.
Exactly. But the point I was going is API is basically going to ask you for information that you have to fill in. There's not much guessing about what's needed. So it's not that it's going to be hard to figure out what's needed. It just takes a while to understand the values for everything. What's the difference between an int 32, and a number? Well, that's pretty basic. But you can put a number, the value number, and it'll work, and that's good enough for right now. Remember, you can always go back and keep adding details, and that's one of the details. But you take that and you modify it and you give it to one of your programming friends and say, write an application from this and only the documentation.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll come back saying, well, it's unusable. I don't know what these are. And that's where you then start. And you do that iteratively.
So, what advice would you have for a new or aspiring technical writer in general? For instance, would you recommend that they learn to program, or is there a particular language, or just, philosophy in general?
That's probably my most frequently asked question. Which language should I learn? And my response, and you ask that on, don't ask that on a forum. You'll get 1,000 responses from 1,000 scopes. And they're all good. All the people are sincere and well-meaning, and they make good case. But make this simple. Look at it this way. 80% of any one language is in common with another language. They all have variable assignments. They all have decision making. If you learn the foundation, and one of my sayings is, learn the theory, the rest are details.
Yeah.
So if you know a language has a decision making, the detail is, it's an if statement. Does it need brackets or not? C needs brackets. Other languages doesn't. But those are details. You're not figuring out how to make a decision. You're just worrying about syntax, and that's mechanical. ChatGPT can't answer that question for you. So learn the theory first. Second thing is learn a language that you can use every day. A common piece of advice is you need to learn a language that your programmers are using. No, you don't at all. They're probably using Java, let's say. I think 75% all APIs are in Java, but you're not going to be reading a lot of their code directly. You don't really have to. You do have to know the concepts. So pick a language that you can use personally every day. That might be Python. Python is a very good language at automation. So you have an open API file in Docs code, you'll need to compile it into JSON format or HTML format, and you might have to send it automatically to a specific folder for it to get processed or whatnot. Or when it's checked in, send it. So those are all good things to learn. You're going to use it. It's going to push you. If I can, the most common question is, can I then do X? Mm-hmm. Well, of course, I had a college professor who always replied to that. You would be disappointed if you couldn't. It's going to push you to learn, if I can send one file, how do I send two? Or how do I convert multiple files at one time? 3, it's something that your team will probably can use. You can share it. Python is a good one. You just claimed you haven't used Word in a while, but I'm an Office programmer too. So I love using VBA, Visual Basic for Automation, because I can control Word programmatically. And I still sort of think in macros right now. Learn a macro. The concepts are there. Learn batch programming. If you're on Windows, that's the old DOS window or the now called what? Windows.
Either terminal or PowerShell, depending on which version.
PowerShell. Or if you're on Mac, you have terminal, but they all have this built-in scripting language. Mm-hmm. Learn that. And that gets you on the road to working with your devs. But do something that you can use personally and is directly helpful in your job. So I tell everyone, as long as you keep moving to the right on the spectrum, not knowing anything to being an expert, as long as you keep moving to the right, you will eventually get to where you need, and it's not a problem. So don't worry about that learning a language seems complex. Take your time, but it is a craft. You do have to work at it every day, but you will eventually get there. Less time than you think, and you may not even know you've reached the spot. It just sort of creeps up on you.
We've got a little less than 5 minutes left. Any closing thoughts?
I would say to anyone new to API writing is one, don't get hung up on tools. I have seen too many discussions in forums where they absolutely like using one tool, or this is the best tool, or this is the best way to do it. I've even seen still in the 21st, we're a quarter of the way through the 21st century, I still see the Windows versus Mac.
That one will never die.
Argument. It needs to.
It should.
It needs to. In the short version of my answer is none of that really matters. Learn whatever tool you need to do, knowing that tools come and go. Tool today is not going to be the tool tomorrow. Learn the theory, then you can use any tool. Remember, learn the theory, the rest are details, and you can use any tool. The second thing is in learning is you're now talking to developers. You're going to have to think like a developer. And the only way to think like a developer is to learn programming. So for instance, what do I mean by that? So I said that everything has a data type. And I said, if you want for numeric values, you can always use the value number in OpenAPI, which can be anything. And by numbers, I mean whole numbers versus decimal numbers. But that's not good enough for developers because developers are reading your code and they will have to type a data type. They will have to add int32, float, something like that. That information comes from your documentation. Saying it's a number does them no good.
Yeah.
They have to stop and figure out what you must mean. And even examples, 5 is unclear. 5 can be both an integer and a float. It's in Pacific. So you have to eventually think like a developer in this. That helps the developers. The less they think, the less they have to actually use. And there's an irony here. The less they use your documentation, actually, the better the documentation. They're glancing at it. They see the example 5.0. That's all the information they may need to know. Don't care what it does. Don't care where it came from. They just need to say it's a float or a decimal or something. Yes, it's sort of ironic. My definition of great documentation is that it's documentation so good that they don't actually have to use it.
Yeah, I mean, good documentation is basically invisible. That's kind of the ongoing joke.
Yeah.
So, Robert, I have had such a great time hearing you talk about API documentation and this, that, and the other thing. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, no, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right, and everyone, resources that Robert mentioned will be listed in the video description. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Technical Writing Uncensored.